Hello, and welcome to our first ever HR on the Offensive live. I don't know, I wasn't sure whether or not to do the whole live thing because it's a bit sort of sports commentary, but Debbie Mitchell, you're joining me for our first
live
HR on the Offensive. Thank you very much, anyone that's listening or paying attention to our first ever recorded live session. This is a session in which it's something that we've thought about for a while at Base Partners, doing some almost live streaming, and we've decided to go have a little test and have a little pilot. And today, as I said, we've got Debbie Mitchell joining us, and we're going to talk about objective setting, because it's objective setting season. So Debbie's going to give us some myths that she's come across in her time. But just before we do that, just framing kind of the live stream, if you like, that we've got. So what we're planning on doing is every week, around about Tuesday afternoonish, might be morning sometimes, we're going to do these little short form pieces of content that we're going to push out on YouTube, and we're going to push out on LinkedIn and Twitter and all of our Lace corporate social channels. And the aim really is to just pick a topic which we're hearing about either when we talk to our clients, or we're hearing about when we talk to HR professionals, or something that's even topical in the press at the moment. There's lots of different types of things that we could be talking about. So what we're going to try and do is, for about 5 minutes to 15 minutes each week, just do these live streaming sessions, and then they'll be available on demand on the Lace Partners different social channels that you get as well. First episode, wanted to do objective setting. We were talking about this last week, weren't we, Debbie? First and foremost, I guess it's, why do we want to do this? Why did we decide to do this? Because we talked about it being objective setting season. And let's get into some of the myths.
Yeah, I mean, we wanted to do it because exactly that. It's objective setting season right now. So most organizations will go through their cycle and, close out the previous year with their performance management process and start thinking about objective setting as we go into the fresh new year. And so it's useful to think about what makes those objectives really meaningful. And in my time sort of working around different organizations, I've come across a number of different myths that I've experienced. I think I'll run through some of the key ones, and Chris, jump in and share your experiences too. And love to hear in the comments of anything else that's going on. But the first one and I'll start all of them by going, and this one drives me mad. But anyway, they all drive me mad. Take that as a given. But the first one is, we hear it a lot that people managers are not able to set objectives for their team members because no one's done theirs yet. So that's the first myth. And I call these people the deniers, right? They don't really want to get into that kind of conversation until they've been told what they've got to do. And for me, the reason we bust this myth is because you do know what has to be done, right? You do know the general direction your whole organization or your function or just your team are headed in, and you can certainly set some objectives that are meaningful, even if it's only in the short term, to help your team feel kind of aligned and ready to go. So please don't stall, crack on and get them done. Remember that business alignment is critical. So we're not just making up kind of random objectives and throwing them out. We are trying to keep aligned with what does the business actually want us to achieve. And so, the advice is crack on, get them done, get something on paper, get your team started, and stop using excuses. And also push your line managers, if you're not getting your reviews, to get your objectives set with you. I include my team in that. If you're out there, if we haven't done it yet, crack on. So that's
I really love that. If I can just jump in, I think it's quite interesting because it almost feels like a bit of a cop-out, doesn't it? It's almost like I'm waiting for somebody else for me to do my bit. Maybe sometimes people use that because they're under their own pressures and perhaps they haven't developed their own objectives out. What's your general kind of view on that? Do you come across that quite often? Like, it's almost I'm just going to leave this to the last minute. And maybe sometimes it's because do they even buy into the whole objective setting process?
Yeah, I think that's partly it. I think it's a buy into it. I think it's understanding and recognizing the value of setting really good objectives, which a lot of what we'll talk about today is focused on sort of making them meaningful, not just once a year I have to do this thing I'm told to do, but understanding really where the value of that comes from. So I think, it's on every single manager to push upwards to make sure they get theirs sorted, but also to pull downwards as well a bit and kind of get their team sorted with something. Don't use the excuse that I'm just waiting to be done to before I can do to someone else. So I think crack on is the summary of the action plan for that.
I love that. So, and I also love you've got a couple of little sort of descriptors for each of them. So that first one was the deniers, and the second one you've got is the magician. So talk to us about the magician.
Yeah, the magician. So the magician is the one who stood around going, well, hang on, I've got to set 6 to 8 objectives, probably because HR told me in my head that's what I've got to do. And I've got 4 people. And so now what I need is to come up with 30 different objectives from a blank sheet of paper. So how am I going to make that magic happen? And again, the frustration for me here is, first of all, there is no magic number. There is no 6 to 8 are the right number. It depends on what the priorities are. You might just have one really big, really key, really critical objective. You might have 10 much smaller ones across the period of a year. So I think that's the first thing is don't be kind of tied into a number. What they do have to do is to represent kind of the spread of the work, and to represent kind of the variation and development and kind of things that we're comfortable doing. Make sure we're stretching company goals and targets, make sure that we are really thinking sort of out of the box, if you like, about what could be done, innovation, financial responsibility, ESG type work, social responsibility, how we work as a team. So all of that stuff needs to be in there, but don't just think I've got to come up with 6 or 8. And the other thing is, as a people manager, don't feel you have to come up with them all yourself anyway. So I would ask you, Chris, you come back and tell me what you think you can do. We know what the company needs to achieve. We know what our team is after this year in terms of goals or targets. So what do you think you can contribute to that? And let's then make that into an objective.
Yeah, I really love that. I really love that. And the reason I love that is because how are you going to get buy-in from any employee if they're basically just top down, here are your objectives, you've got to achieve that. Like the whole reason why this is it's got to be personal, hasn't it? And it's got to develop somebody. And so just doing that kind of, here's your objective, crack on. Like I would argue that, well, and this is kind of what I do with my team as well. I always just say to them, you tell me what your objectives are and I'll help you to hone those. Like I'm not even going to set you a single objective. I'll tell you what we need to achieve as a team. Yeah. I'll tell you what the business is looking to achieve. That's my job, is to be able to cascade that information down. But actually it's you that needs to set that. So that's a really, really good one. So myth number 3 then, the fortune teller. Love it.
The fortune teller. So you sit at your desk at the beginning of the year with your crystal ball, doing whatever crystal balls do, and you can foresee what's going to happen in your business for the next 12 months, and you read the crystal ball, and now you can create a beautiful set of objectives that will stay relevant for that 12-month period. And if you work in that company, please let us know, because I've never experienced it. So much changes in that 12-month period that when you set the objectives in January, you can't guarantee that they'll still be relevant by sometimes February, right? March, April, but certainly by the end of the year is quite challenging. Now, there are some objectives that you could take that long-term view, but I also advocate there might be some where actually you say, let's take a shorter-term view. Let's set this objective for 3 months, and then let's review it and see where we are. And when we review it in a couple of months' time, we might say, okay, that's working. Let's do more of that. Or we might say, not going quite how we thought, so let's park it, scratch it off the whiteboard, let's put something else on. So I like to really focus these as kind of agile objective setting. So we think about, different ways of kind of shaping the objective as we set them out in the beginning of the year, some longer term, but certainly some shorter term, and regular reviews of that, so that we always know that the objectives we are working towards, and importantly, that we might be scored against at the end of the year, are really relevant and meaningful, not just the stuff that came to my mind in January when I was doing my magician bit.
Yeah. Do you know what's really interesting about that? I'd love to get your view on this. How much impact does business culture have on that kind of mindset? Because I've worked in companies previously where it's like you set your objectives, or you set your objectives with your boss at the beginning of the year, and it's almost like that's it, that's got to be it for the year. And so you talked about agility. Have you seen businesses that really struggle with that, and particularly those that maybe are trying to link stuff to performance? Because I guess the argument could be, well, if you're constantly changing and adapting your objectives, how do we actually link to the benefit of your performance?
Yeah. So it's definitely cultural. And again, it depends the extent to which an organization really thinks that performance management processes should be agile, but also that there's value in their agility, right? So that kind of regular check-in rather than an annual performance review, so that there is, you know, an ongoing kind of summary of my performance rather than a rating at the end of the year. Or, you know, so those kind of approaches culturally, you know, they're still quite forward thinking, even though we started to see that emergence of that way of managing performance probably 4 or 5 years ago now. When people were talking about we're throwing away the appraisal process, they didn't really throw it away, they just kind of changed it quite fundamentally. So if they've picked up that kind of that approach to be more agile, then yes, it can be a really meaningful conversation. But one of the reasons it was changing was because lots of research was saying there were hundreds of wasted hours a year by line managers, that there is no productivity improvement through the appraisal and objective setting process. So there was no business case for doing appraisals in the old way. We hope that there is a much better kind of deliverable and productivity by this much more regular review, and that, you know, you're going to review my performance ongoing throughout the year, but when we get to my kind of end of year summary of my performance, then absolutely my objectives may have changed tack and gone off somewhere else, but only because you and I discussed that and because that was what the business needed, right? Rather than, well, it's what we wrote down, so we better score Debbie on that. That's
absolutely spot on. Absolutely right. Let's move on to myth number 4, the hoarder. And no, it's not somebody that keeps lots and lots of things in their house, although you've got lots and lots of books in that background. So could you be classed as a hoarder?
No, definitely not. I mean, this follows on very closely. So it's the hoarder kind of writes the objectives, puts them in a drawer, and then surprises you at Christmas by bringing them back out again. And it's pointless. So because so much changes, so it's having those kind of regular reviews. It's scratching out the ones that aren't right. It's just replacing them with something else, or it's saying, you know, keep pushing harder. Now, the scratching out isn't because I didn't achieve it or I wasn't good enough. That's more push, right? But the scratching out is, well, hang on, we were focusing on that strategic direction, but now actually we need that customer instead. Let's go down this route. Let's follow that route instead. So it's being agile with it, and it's not having it beautifully framed. I always talk about sort of whiteboard them, right? And then you can get the whiteboard rubber out, and you can, you know, change things all over the place. But that's not to say that your performance is flippant. It's to say that your performance objectives are following the route that the business strategy needs from you. You're able to kind of respond to that.
Yeah, absolutely. One more. So the myth number 5 that you've got, the cryptic. Talk to me about the cryptic.
Yeah, well, you know, there's been lots of talk over the years about SMART objectives, and any time I used to turn up to do kind of performance management training, they'd all kind of roll their eyes and go, yeah, we've done SMART objective setting, and they can, you know, reel out what does the SMART acronym mean, but actually putting it into practice was harder. Now, I take a slightly different view that yes, they need to be all of those things in the SMART terminology, so specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, time bound. They do. I'm
glad you said it, because I was trying to rack my brains there for a second. That's what happens when you go live, isn't it?
Yes, I did worry about a blank point, but no, we've got there. But the key thing, I think, is to not get hung up on wording and how are we phrasing it, and does it, you know, tick all those 5 things, but instead to just make sure that between you and I, it's really well mutually understood, right? I know what you mean, you know what you mean, so that when we get to the, you know, the review point and we say, are we getting there? We're both looking at the same factors, right? But I think the other thing that I always really advocate is helping people to understand what good looks like. So you can say to me, I don't know, I'll probably come up with a terrible example now, but, you know, achieve a sales improvement target of 10%, right? So you can say achieve a better sales than you did last year. It's pretty vague, right? But if you tell me by 10% by doing X, Y, and Z, we're getting much clearer. So I understand it better than you do. More importantly, I know what good looks like. So when we do my end of year summary, you might be able to tell me that I've done good, whatever that terminology is in your organization. But I knew what I was expecting. The other element of it is, what does wow look like? I'd love you to tell me, Chris, how do I wow you? Like, how do I get to the end of the year and I've got that top performance rating that I've always really wanted? What does wow look like? So talk about what good is, but talk about if you were going the extra mile, it would be 15%. It would be brand new customers, not existing ones. It would be whole new product lines. It would be new geographies. So it's starting to really kind of draw out some of that detail. And again, it doesn't have to be an exact art. We can just brainstorm those, you and me, to figure it out. But helping people to understand, what does good look like? What does wow look like? And then the other thing is, what's the impact of not doing it? Right. So I don't particularly want to describe to you what it'll look like if you don't achieve this goal, but I might talk to you about why it's really important that we do achieve it, what it means in the bigger scope of things happening in this organization, etc. So I think that kind of, don't go vague, go as specific as you can without spending hours wordsmithing it, but really try and describe what some of those quality targets might look like. What's good, what's wow, what's the value?
I absolutely love that. And also it then feeds into that bit that you mentioned right at the end. It feeds into what I am doing as an individual and how that is contributing towards the business's success. And if I believe that what I'm doing and that's been measurable and I can say, look, this is what I've achieved, it actually gives you that much more engagement. It gives you a greater level of engagement, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And I always describe this. If you tell me that my job is to move, thing A to position B, I can do that all day if you like, but I don't feel engaged or excited by it. I don't feel motivated to try harder or to do it better. But if you start explaining to me why that really matters, that movement from A to B, and what it means for the person before point A, and what it means for the person receiving it after point B, I can start to pull some of those connections together and make it more meaningful, and just really think about, why am I doing it this way? Then what if I don't know, what if I folded the corner over before I gave it to person C? And then, have I helped them just, starting to build those connections and make it all more meaningful and flow much better.
Yeah, and building more innovation as well as a result. So that's the 5 minutes. So
5 minutes.
Just before we wrap up today for this this inaugural HR on the Offensive Live, is there any kind of final sort of points that you would give to anybody listening to this, which is, you've gone through the different myths, the denier, the magician, the fortune teller, the hoarder, and the cryptic. So somebody listening into this, any kind of one final sort of nugget piece of advice you would give to anybody that's in that mode of objective setting right now?
Yeah, I think my high level summary would be, don't do it to somebody. Don't set the objectives for somebody. Really co-create and collaborate with your team members to work out what's meaningful, what's impactful, what they'll enjoy doing, and what has an impact on your business.
That's absolutely amazing. Debbie, thank you very much for joining me for the first ever HR on the Offensive
Live. Thank you very much. It's been fun.
And hopefully those of you that are listening in, whether you've listened in live or whether or not you're listening in after we've recorded, hopefully you found it useful. Please drop us a note and let us know what you thought. We're going to do probably about 6 to 8 of these over the coming weeks just to see how it goes. And then, hey, if it works out, then you'll have to deal with us on a regular weekly basis. But from Debbie and myself, thank you very much. And yeah, we'll see you on the next HR on the Offensive